I still remember the first time I heard the story of Snow White. It was told to me by an old traveler who swore every word of it was true. But today, I'm not simply retelling it the way it has been told for centuries. No, today, I'm sharing it as I have lived it, walked through it, and witnessed it as though I were standing inside those castle walls myself. This is the story as I saw it, the way the wind whispered it to me in the forests, and the echoes of a kingdom long gone carried it back. So, sit with me a while, and let me take you to a place where magic shimmers at the edge of every shadow. A place where a single wish shaped the fate of an entire kingdom. I was in the castle courtyard the day it happened, a cold morning with snow drifting lazily from the sky. The queen, ever gentle and kind, sat by a window sewing tiny garments for yet unborn children she dreamed of one day having. Her fingers worked delicately, but one sudden prick from the needle made her gasp. 3 drops of blood fell onto the snow resting on her windowsill. She looked at the crimson beads and smiled softly, almost dreamily. "I wish," she whispered, and I remember how her breath fogged against the winter air. "For a daughter with skin as white as this snow, lips as red as these drops, and a heart forever full of joy." Something in her tone felt like a quiet promise sent into the sky itself, and even then, I sensed the world listening. Not long after, her wish was granted. A daughter was born, Snow White, a child whose laughter felt like the first sunny day after a long winter. But fate is a fragile thing. The queen, our queen, grew weak shortly after giving birth. Her smile never faded, not even as she held her child one last time. Snow White's wails echoed through the castle halls as the kingdom mourned a loss too heavy to speak of. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the lullaby the queen sang the night before she passed. It felt like she already knew she would not see her daughter grow. A year passed, and the king remarried. The new queen was breathtaking, a woman with flawless golden hair and sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing. The kingdom marveled at her beauty, unaware of the chill she brought into the castle walls. Unlike the first queen, this one sought admiration the way others sought air. Every morning she stood before her magic mirror, an artifact whispered to contain ancient spirits and dangerous truths. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall," she would ask, voice sweet but edged with hunger, "who is the fairest one of all?" And each morning the mirror answered the same, "You, my queen." But beauty without kindness is a brittle thing, and arrogance, it has a way of cracking even the strongest surface. Years passed. Snow White grew from a child into a young girl whose joy warmed every heart she encountered. Servants adored her, villagers smiled at her presence, animals followed her gently through the gardens, and Snow White, in her innocence, had no idea how deeply the queen's jealousy festered with each passing day. Then came the morning everything changed. The queen stood before her mirror again. But this time, the mirror did not speak the familiar words. Instead, it said, "My queen, you are fair, it is true, but Snow White is 1,000 times fairer than you." I saw her face twist, not with sorrow but with a fury sharp enough to chill the room. She dismissed the servants. She paced, and then, in a voice colder than midnight ice, she summoned the royal hunter. I later heard what she told him. Her demand was simple and monstrous. "Take Snow White into the woods, end her life. Bring me her heart." When the hunter left the castle that day with Snow White walking trustingly beside him, my chest tightened with dread. Something terrible was about to unfold. The forest swallowed them whole beneath towering evergreen trees. I followed at a distance, breath shallow, listening to Snow White's light steps and the hunter's heavy ones. He raised his knife. His hands trembled. But then Snow White turned toward him with eyes full of innocent curiosity, eyes so pure they broke whatever darkness had been placed over him. "I cannot do this," he whispered, voice cracking. "Run, Snow White. Run and never return to the castle, for your life depends on it." Snow White froze, fear and confusion swirling in her gaze. "Go!" he urged again, and with that, She ran into the forest, branches tearing at her dress, her footsteps uneven with panic. When her strength eventually failed her, she collapsed beneath an ancient oak tree and fell into a fitful, terrified sleep. As she slept, little forest animals crept around her cautiously, soft paws, twitching noses, all sensing her gentle spirit. I stayed with her until dusk, watching as she stirred awake, lost and frightened. Before we journey deeper into the forest, take a moment to subscribe for more timeless stories, like If You Feel the Magic, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice becomes part of the legend. It was the animals who guided her deeper into the woods, leading her to a peculiar little cottage with a crooked chimney and tiny windows. Inside was chaos. Plates stacked everywhere, crumbs scattered like confetti, and dust so thick it danced in the sunlight. Snow White blinked in disbelief. "Well, someone certainly needs help," she murmured softly. Despite her exhaustion, she set to work, sweeping, washing dishes, dusting, humming as she restored order to the tiny home. When dinner was cooked and the house sparkled, she curled up across several small beds pushed together and drifted into peaceful sleep. Little did she know who the cottage belonged to. Night fell. Lanterns glowed between the trees as 7 small figures trudged home from the mines, pickaxes slung over shoulders. Jolly, angry, clumsy, slumpy Red Ace, and lazy, each with a personality as distinct as their names. The moment they stepped inside, they froze. "Who cleaned our house?" Jolly gasped. "Who touched my tools?" Angry snapped. "And who cooked this amazing dinner?" Red added, eyes wide with delight. Then they saw her, asleep across their beds, glowing softly in the lamplight. When Snow White awoke, she startled at the sight of the 7 tiny men gathered around her, each expression ranging from curiosity to confusion. After a few anxious moments and quick introductions, the dwarfs listened to her story with grave attention. When she explained why she could never return home, they exchanged looks and nodded. "You can stay with us," Ace declared. "We'll keep you safe." "And we'll protect you," Clumsy added, nearly tripping over his own feet. Snow White's eyes brimmed with gratitude. She had found a new family, unexpected and small, but loyal. Weeks passed peacefully. Snow White cooked for the dwarfs, cleaned their home, and greeted them each evening with warmth. Their laughter echoed through the woods, a melody of newfound joy. But far away, in her throne room, the queen stood before her mirror once again. The mirror hesitated, then, with reluctant truth, said, "Snow White lives, hidden with 7 dwarfs in the forest." The queen's scream shook the room. Determined to end Snow White herself, she crafted a disguise: bent back, wrinkled skin, tattered shawl. A perfect old peddler woman. In her basket lay a single apple, half red with beauty, half cursed with death. I followed her into the forest, my stomach churning. She found Snow White alone, humming as she picked flowers beside the cottage. "Dear child," croaked the disguised queen, "won't you try this fresh apple? A gift from my heart." Snow White hesitated, but her gentle nature had always been her greatest vulnerability. She accepted the apple. She bit into it, and she crumpled to the ground, silent and still. The queen smiled, an expression void of warmth, before disappearing into the trees as swiftly as she had come. When the dwarfs returned and saw Snow White lifeless on the forest floor, their cries echoed for miles. They refused to bury her, for she looked too alive, too perfect, as though merely waiting to awaken. So, they built a glass coffin and placed her on a quiet hill where sunlight always seemed to shine. I stood with them many nights, watching the moonlight reflect off the glass, praying silently that this was not the end. One morning, as dawn painted the sky in pink and gold, a young prince arrived with a small group of guards. He had once seen Snow White from afar and had never forgotten her kindness. When he reached the glass coffin, he knelt beside it, whispering words meant only for her. He leaned forward. He kissed her gently. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Snow White inhaled sharply, as though waking from the deepest sleep. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked around in confusion until her gaze fell on the prince. The dwarfs cheered, birds sang, the forest breathed again. Snow White lived. News of her revival spread quickly. When the king heard what had become of his daughter, fury replaced his grief. He confronted the evil queen, stripping her of her crown and banishing her from the kingdom forever. As for Snow White, the prince brought her to the castle, not as a prisoner of fate, but as a beloved guest, and eventually, a bride. Their wedding was a celebration so bright that even the mountains seemed to glow. The dwarfs stood proudly among the guests, each dressed in their finest tiny outfits. And I watched it all from the edge of the courtyard, heart finally at ease. The kingdom flourished again. Laughter returned to the halls once filled with sorrow. Snow White's joy touched everyone who crossed her path. In the end, the queen's original wish came true in ways even she could never have imagined. A daughter with skin as white as snow, lips as red as cherries, and a heart overflowing with joy. A heart strong enough to survive jealousy, cruelty, and even death itself. And so, as all good stories remind us, light may fall, but it always rises again. This, dear listener, is how Snow White found her happy ending. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade into silence. Subscribe for more reimagined fairy tales. Like to help this story reach more dreamers? And comment your favorite moment. I'd love to hear your thoughts from the kingdom beyond the mirror.